The smell of chili and garlic drifted through the narrow hallway of the research vessel long before anyone saw where it came from. Doors along the corridor slid open one by one as crew members poked their heads out, sniffing the air with confusion. On most ships, unknown smells meant a leak or a malfunction. Nobody expected it to be lunch. Daniel sat alone at the far end of the mess hall, a metal bowl in front of him filled with rice. A young officer named Talus had just entered the mess hall to grab a nutrient packet before his shift. He stopped in his tracks when he saw Daniel. The human's face had turned red. Sweat rolled down his forehead. His eyes were watering, and small sounds were coming from his throat, somewhere between a groan and a sigh. Talus had read about humans in the crew handbook, but nothing about this. On his homeworld, a person sweating and groaning while their eyes "Are you well?" Talus asked, his voice higher than usual. Daniel opened one eye, still chewing. He mumbled, giving a thumbs up before scooping another spoonful. That was not reassuring. Talus had seen humans use that hand gesture before, but he had also just watched Daniel's whole face turn a shade of red not far from the sauce in his bowl. To Talus, this looked exactly like the final stage of an allergic reaction described in the medical training videos. He backed away slowly, then turned and ran. He didn't run far. The alarm panel was only a few steps down the hall, mounted beside the door. Talus slammed his hand against it without hesitation. A sharp whine echoed through the ship, followed by flashing red lights along every corridor. Doors sealed shut in sequence, one after another, as the ship's systems moved into lockdown. In the mess hall, Daniel nearly dropped his spoon in surprise. He looked around, confused, as the lights above him blinked red and a mechanical voice began repeating a phrase in 3 different alien languages. He couldn't understand any of them, but the tone was clear enough. Something was wrong. He just didn't know it was him. Footsteps thundered down the hallway outside. A moment later, the mess hall door burst open, and a group of crew members rushed in wearing protective suits, carrying scanning devices and medical equipment. At the front of the group was Talus, pointing frantically at Daniel. There, that is him. He was sweating and groaning, and his face changed color. The lead medic, a tall alien with pale blue skin, raised a scanning device toward Daniel and swept it slowly across his body. The readings on the small screen blinked rapidly, showing spikes in body temperature, heart rate, and something the device labeled as neural distress. None of them noticed that the readings also showed a steady, calm breathing pattern, because they weren't looking for that. They were only looking for confirmation of what they already believed. Daniel set his spoon down carefully, raising both hands in the air. Whoa, hold on. I'm fine. This is just food. Nobody responded to him directly. Instead, they spoke quickly to each other in their own language, gesturing toward the bowl in front of him, toward his face, and toward the scanning device. One of them reached for a communicator on their wrist and requested an emergency medical team to the mess hall immediately. Daniel tried again, louder this time. Guys, seriously, I'm eating lunch. It's spicy. That's why my face is like this. The word spicy did not translate well. The ship's translation system searched for the closest match and landed on a word that roughly meant sharp poison in their language. This did not help his case at all. If anything, it made things worse. Several of the crew members took a step back from him, as if he had just confirmed their worst fears. More footsteps echoed. Daniel looked down at his half-finished bowl of food, then back up at the crowd of worried faces surrounding him. He sighed, already knowing this was going to take a while to explain. Still, he wasn't about to let a good meal go to waste without a fight. He reached for his spoon one more time, scooping up another bite before anyone could stop him. The crowd gasped as he brought it to his mouth and chewed, calm as ever, right in front of the drones and the stretcher and the wide, staring eyes of the entire medical team. Whatever was about to happen next, he figured he might as well enjoy his lunch while he still could. A quiet voice cut through the noise of the crowded mess hall. Everyone, step back. Let me see him. The crowd parted as a woman with pale gray skin and calm, steady eyes walked forward. Her name was Rayla, the ship's chief medical officer. She had handled hundreds of medical emergencies across a dozen different species during her career, but never one quite like this. She knelt beside Daniel and studied his face carefully, watching the sweat still forming on his brow and the redness that had not yet faded. Sir, can you tell me your name and confirm you know where you are? She asked, her tone professional and even. Daniel. And yes, I know exactly where I am. I'm in the mess hall, eating my lunch, which is now cold, by the way. He gestured toward the bowl on the table, still half full. Rayla exchanged a glance with one of her assistants, who was holding up a scanning device with readings that made no sense to her. Elevated heart rate, elevated body temperature, unusual activity in what her species classified as the brain's distress centers. And yet Daniel sat calmly, arms crossed, clearly annoyed rather than in pain. Your body is showing signs of significant stress, Rayla said slowly. We need to run a full examination to determine the cause. Daniel rubbed his temples. The cause is right there in the bowl. It's spicy food. I put hot peppers in it. That's why my face is red and I'm sweating. It's not dangerous, it's just spicy. Rayla frowned, turning to look at the bowl. She had never heard of a species intentionally eating something that caused this kind of physical response. On her homeworld, food that caused sweating and tears was avoided at all costs, usually thrown out before anyone got close enough to taste it. You are telling me, she said carefully, that you consumed this substance on purpose, knowing it would cause these reactions? Yes, that's exactly what I'm telling you. It tastes good. The burn is part of it. The room fell quiet for a moment. Several crew members exchanged uneasy looks. One of them muttered something under his breath that the translator rendered as he enjoys pain, which spread through the small crowd like wildfire, each person repeating it to the person next to them with growing alarm. Rayla held up a hand, silencing the murmurs. She was not willing to take chances, not with a species her crew had only recently begun studying. I understand your explanation, and I want to trust it. But until we can confirm there is no danger, I need to take you to the medical bay for observation. This is standard procedure, and it protects you as much as it protects the crew. Daniel opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. He had been on this ship long enough to know that standard procedure was not something easily avoided, especially when an entire crew had just watched him apparently distress himself over a bowl of rice and beans. Arguing would only make him look more suspicious, not less. Fine, he said, standing up slowly. But I want my food to come with me. I wasn't finished. One of the medical assistants stepped forward immediately, sliding a container over the bowl before Daniel could reach it. This will need to be tested first, the assistant said. For safety reasons. Daniel watched, mildly horrified, as his lunch was sealed away and carried off like evidence from a crime scene. He looked at Rayla, who offered nothing more than a small, apologetic shrug. You can have it back, she said, once we understand what it is. It's beans and rice with hot sauce, Daniel muttered as he was gently guided toward the door by two crew members. There's nothing to understand. The walk to the medical bay felt longer than it should have. Crew members lined the hallway, watching him pass with wide, curious eyes. Word had clearly spread fast. Someone in the crowd whispered something about the human who eats poison, and Daniel resisted the urge to correct them loudly. He decided it wasn't worth the energy, not yet anyway. When they reached the medical bay, Rayla guided him into a small, clean room with a single bed and a wide viewing window. Please make yourself comfortable, she said. We will begin testing the substance you consumed, and we will need to run a few scans on you as well, just to be thorough. Daniel sat down on the edge of the bed, arms crossed, staring at the sealed container, holding his lunch through the window on the other side of the room. It sat on a metal tray under bright analysis lights, being handled by two lab technicians wearing thick protective gloves, as if it might explode. You know, he said to no one in particular. Back home, we just call this Tuesday. Rayla, halfway out the door, paused and looked back at him with a puzzled expression, clearly unsure whether that was meant to be helpful or not. She decided not to ask, and the door slid shut behind her, leaving Daniel alone with his thoughts, his empty stomach, and a growing sense that this misunderstanding was only just beginning. In the analysis lab down the hall, two technicians stood over Daniel's confiscated lunch like archaeologists studying a dangerous artifact. The container had been placed inside a sealed chamber, and a thin mechanical arm extended from the wall, drawing a small sample of the red sauce for testing. Running molecular scan now, said one of the technicians, a thin, nervous man named Carell. He watched the screen carefully as lines of data scrolled past, waiting for the results to appear. The scan finished, and both technicians leaned in closer to read the output. A single compound stood out immediately, flagged in bright yellow across the screen. Capsaicin, present in a concentration the system automatically labeled as high-risk irritant. Carell's eyes widened. That's a lot of it. Send this to Rayla immediately, said the second technician, already reaching for the comm panel. And notify the bridge. If humans are consuming this regularly, we may have a serious problem. Word spread through the ship faster than anyone expected. Within the hour, a general bulletin appeared on every crew member's personal screen, warning them to closely monitor the eating habits of any human aboard the vessel. The message used careful, official language, but the meaning was clear enough to anyone reading between the lines. Humans might be poisoning themselves without realizing it, generation after generation, and nobody knew why. Back in the observation room, Daniel sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the ceiling, thoroughly bored. His stomach growled loudly, reminding him that his lunch was still sitting in a lab somewhere being treated like a hazardous substance. He had tried explaining the situation to 3 different crew members already, and each conversation had ended the same way, with polite nods and zero understanding. A soft chime sounded at the door, and it slid open to reveal someone new. She was shorter than most of the crew he had met so far, with curious green eyes and a notepad tucked under one arm. She introduced herself as Orsa, a xenoanthropologist who studied the behavior and culture of newly contacted species. I heard about the incident in the mess hall, she said, stepping into the room and taking a seat on a nearby stool. I would like to ask you some questions, if you don't mind. Daniel sat up a little straighter, relieved to see someone who didn't look immediately alarmed by his presence. Finally, someone who wants to talk instead of scan me. Orsa smiled faintly, opening her notepad. I study behavior, not biology. I want to understand why you did what you did, not just what happened to your body afterward. That's refreshing, Daniel said. Ask away. Your medical team found a compound in your food that our species classifies as a dangerous irritant, and yet you consumed it willingly, and by all accounts, you appeared to enjoy it. Can you help me understand this? Daniel thought for a moment, trying to figure out how to explain something so simple in a way that would actually make sense to someone who had never experienced it. Where I'm from, we have this idea that food isn't just about survival. It's about experience. Some people like sweet food. Some people like sour food. And some people, like me, like food that has a bit of a kick to it. It's not about pain. It's about feeling something intense and enjoying it. Orsa wrote quickly, her pen moving across the notepad. So the discomfort is intentional? A chosen sensation rather than an accident? Exactly. It's like, think of it as an adventure for your mouth. The burn wakes you up, gets your blood pumping, and then underneath all that heat, there's actual flavor. Real, complex flavor. Most people who eat spicy food aren't trying to hurt themselves. They're chasing that feeling and the taste that comes with it. Orsa tilted her head, clearly fascinated but still unsure. I find this difficult to fully understand through description alone. Is there any way I could witness this firsthand? Daniel's eyes lit up. You want to try it? I would like to observe the process more closely, yes. Perhaps even sample a very small amount, under controlled conditions, if that would help my research. Daniel grinned, sitting up fully now, his boredom completely forgotten. Now we're talking. Get my lunch back from your lab, and I'll show you exactly what Orsa hesitated, glancing toward the door where 2 guards remained stationed just outside, still uncertain about the whole situation. I will need to request special permission for that, she said. The substance is currently classified as a potential hazard. It's beans, Daniel said flatly. With sauce. I understand your perspective. However, protocol must be followed. Orsa stood, tucking her notepad under her arm again. Give me a moment. I believe I can convince them to release a small sample for a supervised demonstration. She turned and left the room, the door sliding shut behind her. Daniel leaned back against the wall, a small, hopeful smile forming on his face for the first time since the alarms had gone off. Finally, someone on this ship seemed willing to actually understand him instead of just being afraid of him. All he needed now was his lunch back and a chance to prove that a burning mouth and a happy stomach were not signs of an emergency after all. It took nearly an hour, but Orsa finally returned, carrying a small tray with a single portion of Daniel's lunch on it. Steam rose gently from the bowl, freshly reheated. Behind her walked Rayla, arms crossed, watching the whole exchange with a cautious, professional distance. I convinced them to allow a small, supervised sample, Orsa said, setting the tray down on the table beside Daniel's bed. Rayla insisted on being present, in case of any adverse reaction. Adverse reaction, Daniel repeated with a small laugh. Okay, fair enough. Let's do this properly then. He reached for the spoon, pausing for a moment to explain before taking a bite. So, back where I'm from, there's a whole range of spicy food. This isn't even that extreme, honestly. It's medium level, by my standards. But to you, it'll probably feel Orsa nodded, notepad ready, eyes fixed on him with sharp focus. Daniel took a bite, chewing slowly this time so they could watch the process unfold. Within seconds, the familiar reaction began. His face flushed, his eyes started to water, and a light sheen of sweat formed on his forehead. But this time, instead of just enjoying it quietly, he narrated each sensation as it happened. Okay, right now the heat is building on my tongue. That's the capsaicin your scanners detected. It's not actually burning my mouth. It just tricks my brain into thinking it is. That's why I'm sweating. It's my body trying to cool itself down, like it would from real heat. Orsa wrote furiously, glancing between her notes and Daniel's face. And the tears? The elevated heart rate? Same thing. My nervous system reacts like there's danger, even though there isn't. And here's the interesting part. He took another bite, chewing thoughtfully. After the heat hits, my brain releases something called endorphins. It's like a natural reward chemical. That's the part that actually feels good. The burn and the reward happen almost at the same time, which is why it feels like an intense experience instead of just pain. Rayla stepped a little closer, her scientific curiosity slowly starting to outweigh her caution. You are telling me your species deliberately triggers a stress response in order to trigger a reward response. Basically, yeah. And underneath all that, there's still just really good flavor. The peppers, the spices, the sauce, it all works together. It's not just about the heat. The heat is only part of the experience. Orsa looked down at the tray, then back up at Daniel. May I try it? Rayla's head snapped toward her immediately. Orsa, I don't think that's wise. We don't fully understand the long-term effects on our physiology yet. It's a single small bite, Orsa said, already reaching for the spare spoon on the tray. For research purposes, I want to understand this firsthand, not just through description. Daniel held up a hand gently. You don't have to prove anything. But if you want to try it, I'd start really small. Like, tiny amount small. Orsa nodded, scooping up the smallest portion she could manage on the tip of the spoon. She held it up, studying it for a moment, the red sauce glistening under the room's bright lights. Rayla watched with obvious tension, ready to intervene at the first sign of trouble. For science, Orsa said, the moment the sauce touched her tongue, her whole body reacted. Her eyes widened first, then began watering almost immediately. A strange, high-pitched sound escaped her throat, somewhere between surprise and distress. Her skin, usually a soft green color, began to flush with a deep reddish tint along her cheeks and neck. Rayla moved forward instantly. Orsa, are you? Daniel watched with a mix of concern and amusement, ready to grab a glass of water if things went too far. But Orsa didn't ask for water. Instead, after a few seconds of heavy breathing, her expression shifted from shock into something closer to fascination. That was intense, she said slowly, still catching her breath. But underneath the burn, there was something else. A depth of flavor I wasn't expecting. Layers of taste, one after another. Daniel grinned, leaning back against the wall. See? That's exactly what I was talking about. Rayla stood frozen for a moment, watching Orsa recover, clearly torn between professional concern and pure scientific curiosity. She had spent years studying species from across known space, but she had never witnessed anything quite like this, a being deliberately triggering discomfort in pursuit of pleasure and apparently understanding why almost immediately after trying it. This, Rayla finally said, half to herself, is going to require a much longer report than I originally planned. News of what happened in the observation room spread through the ship even faster than the original alarm had. By the time evening shift began, nearly every crew member had heard some version of the story, each one slightly more exaggerated than the last. Some said the human had made a scientist cry with a single bite of food. Others whispered that the substance had nearly stopped her heart before she recovered on her own. A few claimed Orsa had begged for more afterward, which, as it turned out, Rayla sat in her office reviewing the scan data from Orsa's brief reaction, comparing it carefully against Daniel's earlier readings. The patterns were strikingly similar. Elevated heart rate, temperature spikes, watering eyes, all followed by a rapid return to normal levels within minutes, alongside clear signs of increased activity in pleasure-related regions of the brain. It wasn't poisoning. It wasn't an allergic reaction. It was something else entirely, something her species had never encountered before. She leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. Her entire medical framework was built around treating unusual bodily reactions as signs of danger. This situation didn't fit that model at all. It was, essentially, a voluntary and temporary stress response, chosen specifically because of the reward that followed it. A notification chimed on her screen. It was a message from the ship's captain requesting an update on the human food incident, as it was now officially being called in internal reports. Rayla sighed and began typing her summary, trying to explain something that still didn't feel entirely real, even after witnessing it twice. "You handled that better than I expected," Daniel said between bites. "Most people who try spicy food for the first time need a lot longer to recover. I study unfamiliar experiences for a living," Orsa replied, still slightly out of breath but smiling now. "Though I admit, none of my previous research prepared me for that particular sensation." The door chimed, and a small group of crew members hesitantly peeked inside. Word had spread that the human's food might not be dangerous after all, and curiosity, it seemed, was a powerful thing, capable of overcoming caution rather quickly once fear started to fade. A few of them lingered near the doorway, eyeing the nearly empty bowl on the table with a mixture of nervousness and interest. "Is it true," one of them asked quietly, "that Orsa tried the substance and survived?" "I did more than survive," Orsa said, straightening up proudly. "I found it fascinating." That single sentence seemed to break something loose in the room. Within minutes, more crew members had gathered near the doorway, whispering among themselves, some daring each other to step inside and ask Daniel questions directly. A few of the braver ones actually did, peppering him with questions about human food, human customs, and why anyone would choose to eat something that made them sweat and cry at the same time. Daniel answered each question patiently, enjoying the sudden shift from being treated like a medical emergency to being treated like an interesting curiosity. It was, he thought, a considerable improvement. Rayla arrived a short while later, stepping into a room now filled with far more crew members than she had approved for a supervised medical observation. She raised an eyebrow at the small crowd, but said nothing at first, watching the interaction unfold with growing interest of her own. "The captain has requested a formal review of human dietary customs," she announced finally, cutting through the chatter. "Given today's events, it seems wise to better understand what we are actually dealing with, rather than continuing to react out of fear." A murmur of agreement passed through the small crowd. Even Talus, the young officer who had triggered the very first alarm, stood quietly near the back of the group, looking somewhat embarrassed but undeniably curious as well. Daniel looked around at the gathered crew members, then down at his empty bowl, and finally back up at Rayla. "So, does this mean I get to keep making my own food from now on, without triggering a ship-wide lockdown every time?" Rayla considered this for a long moment before answering. "I believe," she said slowly, "that a proper review is exactly what we need before making that determination. Though I admit, based on what I've witnessed today, an outright ban seems increasingly unlikely." Orsa smiled, already flipping to a fresh page in her notepad. "I would very much like to be part of that review, if permission is granted. There is clearly much more to learn here." As the small crowd continued talking and asking more questions, none of them seemed to notice Talus quietly stepping forward, eyeing the empty bowl on the table with a strange, hesitant curiosity of his own, as if some small part of him was starting to wonder. 3 days later, the mess hall looked nothing like it had during the original incident. Instead of alarms and medical drones, there were tables pushed together, small serving trays lined up in a row, and a modest crowd of crew members gathered around, waiting with a strange mix of nervousness and excitement. Daniel stood at the front, wearing a simple apron, stirring a large pot of his homemade sauce while explaining the process to anyone who asked. The formal review Rayla had promised turned out to be far less formal than anyone expected. After several long meetings and countless pages of reports, the captain had decided that the most useful way to understand human food customs was to simply let the crew experience it directly, under proper supervision, of course. What started as a cautious scientific review slowly turned into something closer to a shared meal, with Daniel more than happy to take on the role of guide. "This one is mild," he explained, pointing to a tray of orange-colored samples. "Good starting point if you've never tried spice before. And this one," he gestured to a smaller tray with a deep red sauce, "is closer to what caused all the commotion in the first place." Orsa stood beside him, now fully recovered and clearly enjoying her unofficial role as translator between human customs and everyone else's confusion. "Remember," she added to the gathered crowd, "the discomfort is temporary and, by all accounts, part of the enjoyment rather than something to fear." A line began to form, hesitant at first, then growing more confident as crew members watched each other try small samples without any serious harm coming to them. Most reacted with wide eyes and sharp intakes of breath, followed by fanning motions and quiet requests for water. A few, much to Daniel's amusement, immediately asked for a second. Rayla stood off to the side, arms crossed as usual, watching the scene with an expression that had slowly shifted over the past few days from concern to something closer to reluctant fascination. She held a data pad, updating the ship's medical records in real time as she observed each reaction. "Human spice consumption," she murmured while typing. "Voluntary, recreational, generally non-lethal when consumed in reasonable quantities." She paused, glancing up at the crowd still lined up for samples, then added one more note. "Also, apparently, contagious in terms of curiosity." Talus approached the table cautiously, having finally worked up the nerve after watching several others go before him. He picked up the smallest sample available, staring at it for a long moment before glancing at Daniel. "Will this cause the same reaction you had?" he asked. "The sweating and the sounds you were making?" Daniel smiled, remembering exactly how this had all started. "Probably a milder version, yeah. But don't worry, it's not dangerous. I promise." Talus took a deep breath, then popped the small piece into his mouth. His reaction was almost immediate, eyes widening, a small gasp escaping him as heat spread across his tongue. He fanned his face rapidly, making a sound that drew a few chuckles from the crowd around him. "That is," he paused, catching his breath, clearly searching for the right word, "unexpected." "Good unexpected, or bad unexpected?" Daniel asked. Talus considered this seriously for a moment, still slightly out of breath. "I am uncertain, but I believe I understand now why you did not panic during the alarm. This is not what pain feels like at all, not truly. It feels more like surprise." Daniel nodded, pleased with the answer. "That's exactly it. It's a surprise your body By the end of the gathering, nearly everyone had tried at least one sample, and several crew members were already asking Daniel if he could teach them how to prepare human dishes themselves, curious to explore this strange new experience further on their own. The ship's kitchen staff even requested access to his recipes, hoping to add a small human-inspired section to the regular meal rotation. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Rayla approached Daniel one final time, setting down her data pad. "I want to formally apologize," she said, "for the confusion this caused, and for the trouble you went through because of it." Daniel waved a hand casually. "Honestly, it's fine. I get it. You didn't know. Now you do. I also want to thank you," she continued. "This entire situation has taught us more about human resilience and behavior than months of standard observation could have. It seems your species finds meaning in experiences the rest of us instinctively avoid." Daniel shrugged, glancing around at the now empty trays and satisfied, slightly red-faced crew members scattered around the mess hall. "We just like a little excitement with our meals, that's all." As he began cleaning up the last of the trays, he couldn't help but smile, thinking back to how it had all started, with a single bowl of spicy food and one very worried officer who thought he was witnessing someone's final moments. Instead, it had turned into something far more interesting, a small, unexpected bridge between two very different species, built entirely out of curiosity, courage, and a shared love of trying something new. Even when it made your eyes water and your whole body protests along the way.